And in that, the authors trace some of the ancient Sumerian kings, and they had rather unlikely spans of their reigns, like 30,000 years and 40,000 years. I can't help thinking, well, surely they've got 3 noughts knocked in there somewhere. I'm suspicious of that, but it's the sort of thing that you might like to have a look at yourselves and draw your own conclusions, because I'm not really don't really want to sort of say this is this and this is that. All I'm saying is this is the evidence, and what do we think, people? So we go on to the next one as well. This I thought was worth pointing out, how small we are. The Earth shown for size in comparison to the Sun. And at this point, having shown, I mean, this is a coronal mass ejection. Look how vast it is. In actual fact, as coronal mass ejections go, that's a small one. I mean, here's a big one. This, you saw that our size relative to the Sun. That is the Sun, and that is a coronal mass ejection. And look at the width of it. And that's, where are we? Scale, width is, yes. Yes, a 5 million mile solar eruption as Comet Neat. And Comet Neat was an extremely large body. It was planet-sized. And that was in, was that 2003, I think it was, thereabouts. That came round. And if you notice, this bushy tail, comets, contrary to what NASA like to try and claim, in fact, they seem to be giving up saying this now. They've been trying to say that comets are snowballs of matter with rocks and bits and dust and sort of mixed in with them, and that the tail is just the vapor trail behind this lot as they go along. But in fact, what that is, the comet is most definitely rock, and what's going off behind is plasma. It's a, if you like, a blazing ionized trail, because what this shows, if we go on to the next one, which is hypothetical, a lightning strike. Now that has got to be the biggest lightning strike in history, if you think about it. I mean, the thing is that we're about the size of that little dot there. So it puts us in our place a bit, doesn't it? Yeah, next. This is one of my favorite photographs, Noah's Ark. How many of you are familiar with the fossil of Noah's Ark in the foothills of the Ararat Range? Because it's something which a gentleman by the name of Ron Wyatt was spearheading work on this. And what appears to have happened is that Noah's Ark, which was the same dimensions and size as the Canberra liner, and what's there now is 512 feet long, and it would have been about 70 feet wide and about 45 feet high. And what they've been able to identify where it had originally landed higher up the mountain, and there was a volcanic eruption and a mudslide or pyroclastic flow, more likely to be in a mudslide, I think, carried it down the mountain, and it got stuck on a rock there. I mean, it could have gone on down, further on down into the valley, but that's where it got stuck. And it rather sort of pulled open one side. But Ron Wyatt found that when he was doing ground penetration radar soundings, this was back in the 1980s, that he mapped out an iron frame. And there was a program about it on BBC Two, as I was saying, about 1994, 3, 4, something around about then. And what was shown of this iron frame would have done credit to any modern naval architect. The other thing they found in it was that drilling down to sort of take samples, of course the trouble with drilling into something like that, you never know when you might be drilling through a marble statue. But anyway, from the bottom of the thing, what they estimated to be the bottom of the thing, they pulled up metalworking slag, which had a high proportion of titanium in it. I think I'm of the view that what we have on this planet of ours is cyclic catastrophism, and every few thousand years we have some sort of a mega event which puts us all back to the proverbial Stone Age. So if we assume that in that time before the flood, that their technologies were fairly advanced, after all, they had an ideal living conditions. I mean, the whole of the planet was according to the Bible, was like living in a greenhouse. And, no wind to speak of. It didn't rain. You just had a heavy dew at night, which provided water. And lifespans were exceedingly long. The longest lived man in the Bible was Methuselah at 968 years, I think it is. And Noah was 500 years old. And in fact, I'm pulling something back in now, that Noah, according to the Bible, was pure in his generation, or undefiled in his generation. In fact, I can give you the exact words if you like, because that's what I want to just refer to. Let's see, where are we? Hang on. Yes, here we are. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. So that's the point there, that he was perfect. In other words, he didn't have any of the DNA of the giants and the fallen angels. It says it took him 100 years to build it, and I could believe that if it was a concept that had never been done before. If you had to build a ship where there'd be no need to build large ships, you'd have to design all your technology as you went along. So, okay, you build the ship, that might wait. Supposing that took 20 years, having smelted the iron and steel and everything else. In fact, there's a lot of iron rivets on it. And they found that gopher wood refers to not just the tree and so on, but it also refers in Hebrew, because there are many, many layers of meaning in Hebrew, laminated wood, and that's what they found. But the other things that he would have to develop would be propulsion, air handling, lighting, automated systems, because if you're going to carry thousands of animals, and you've only got 8 people on the boat, that's him, his wife, and his 3 sons and their wives, and everything would have to be mechanized, because otherwise you'd never do it with 8 people. And of course, it was a long voyage. It was going to be a year. That they had to be prepared for a long voyage. It rained for 40 days and 40 nights, the Bible tells us. And then after that, they floated around, as presumably because there was so much mayhem, there were probably enormous amounts of debris. The other point is that it's quite likely that in the breaking up of the crust, and all the upheaval that was going on, but this ark would have had to have been a semi-submersible, might have spent some of its time underwater at times, and because if you get a tsunami blowing across, it could be a mile high, all right, you go up to a point, and then, well, goodness knows what would happen. But yes, the other thing is that they might have been exposed to some quite nasty radioactivity. Because when you break the crust, you get a lot of that. They get a lot of that in the oil industry, I understand. The Piper Alpha platform, which had to be scrapped years ago, that was a bit contentious, because one of the reasons why they had to scrap it was that when they set it down on the seabed, it broke a rather nasty pocket of radioactivity. But anyway, all those things would have to be taken care of and developed, so it's not surprising it took 100 years to build. And of course, if you've got very long lifespans where you're going to live for hundreds of years, you can take your time. But anyway, right, now what I want to talk about now is Planet X. Who's not familiar with Planet X? Right. Well, in fact, if we just sort of read what's on the screen.
Sorry.
That's all right. That's all right.
Go back.
Yeah, just go back. So get a chance to read that. Yes, it was theoretically recognized. They launched the RS, and apparently the various universities and so on had bought time on the RS, and when they found Planet X, this very large body, far out, at the outer edges of the solar system. They rather threw in the bin the programs that people had paid for and just focused on Planet X and used up all its energy focusing on it and getting all the information, all the data they could off it. It is coming this way, and in fact you'll see on the photographs as we progress. And it's the Sumerians referred to this other planet called Nibiru, which is one of the things that goes round Planet X. I should explain that Planet X is a brown dwarf. So that is, it's sort of part way between a planet and a star. It hasn't got the mass to burn and ignite with the right thermonuclear reactions of a star, but it's still a very dense body, somewhere in the region of the size of Jupiter, possibly larger, and much, much denser. And it's sort of, if you can imagine a fire sputtering away, and that's what it does. So it has a huge debris cloud round it, and it seems that it's got, from this, either, well, this says 5 minor planets. You can see 5 on the photographs as we go on. Yes, this is just to give you a feel, just to sort of recap on what we have in the solar system. We've got the inner planets, and of course that includes us, and the Moon, Mars, and then the larger planets, and then of course way out. Now this is referring to Nibiru, but in actual fact, Nibiru is one of the planets that goes round Planet X. So this is not wonderfully clear. You can see the dates of these photographs. You can see by the stars that are in each image that it's the same place in the sky, and it does appear from May to September to have got a little bit bigger. So this is the idea of I mean, this depiction is not to scale, but it gives you an idea that some sort of a mini system coming this way, which is likely to interfere with our planets in this end of the solar system. The ancient Egyptians seem to depict it like that. It appears that's the sort of winged disc. You see an awful lot of winged discs in Egyptology. So anyway, the American government decided that they would spend billions of pounds on the South Pole telescope, which they've located on the South Pole, and as I say, an enormous undertaking under the most extremely difficult conditions. I mean, the main body of the telescope weighed about 250 tons, and they flew it in one lump. But that is tracking what's going on. I mean, it's supposedly just an academic research project probing into space in the infrared. Of course, the other thing about Planet X is because it is very, very dim, it's relatively cold, although we're told that as it gets nearer to our sun, it warms up and it starts to get a bit more active and the fire gets a bit stoked. That may be partly to do with electrical interactions because, as you may be aware, we actually have an electric universe, hence that earlier shot of the proverbial lightning strike. And it could be that the interactions, the electrical interactions, as it gets nearer, cause it to heat up and become more visible and to glow more. But at the moment, it's very hard to see. And in fact, in recent years, astronomers have discovered that the universe is absolutely full of brown dwarfs, but they're so difficult to spot because they hardly emit anything. And so you have to have your detector kept at as close to absolute zero, minus 273, as you can, and then you can detect whatever body might be just a few degrees warmer, but still extraordinarily cold. So yes, the real reason for the telescope, we believe, is Planet X. This is a photograph. I don't know what to make of this photograph because the sun is sun's all over the place, isn't it? I mean, it's right down there, and the thing is up in the sky. Maybe whether it's rising. You see this object. I haven't made my mind up about that, whether that's genuine or not. I don't think it's a sundog because it's a bit far away. You know, the sundogs, when you get the atmospherics are such that you've got a reflection of the sun quite close to it. I think it's too far away. So that, according to what we read, Planet X may now be visible to the naked eye in the southern hemisphere. But the point being that a lot of people believe it's going to cross the ecliptic, which of course is the plane of all the planets going around the sun. It's going to cross the ecliptic at about 30 degrees from the south in December 2012. And the question is, where will we be in relation to its locality, and how much damage will we suffer, and how severe will it be? There's a rather pessimistic speculation that 2/3 of the population of the planet could perish during the coming pole shift caused by the passage of Nibiru and Planet X. The point being that if you've got, imagine two magnets, one's very small and the other is much bigger, and you put them on the table and you gradually move them towards each other. Before they do that, one of them is going to align to the other one. And that's what could happen because, of course, we have a magnetic iron core. And with whether it's Planet X or Nibiru coming closest to us, there's the danger that we may align, and in so doing, we'll get a pole shift. Because I don't know if you know that the core of the Earth is solid. Then there's this viscous layer around it, and then the crust of the Earth is very thin. It's anything from 5 to 30 miles in thickness, but in some areas it's much thicker than that, of course. But that's a sort of fairly typical average range. So what it means is that the core will align fairly quickly, and then because of the viscous matter, there'll be a gradual, the rest of the Earth will sort of follow in a kind of a lag. And on that basis, under those circumstances, it will slow down and stop. And depending on how severe the situation is, you know what happens if you're carrying a bucket of water that's full to the brim and you suddenly stop, it sloshes over the rim. Well, we might get that happening with the oceans, but on the other hand, if it slows slowly enough, then there may not be too much of an issue. There's two references in the Bible which have been verified by scientists relating to the stopping of the rotation of the Earth. One relates to Hezekiah and the prophet Elijah, that went to see him, and he was told to tell him that put your house in order because you're going to die. And anyway, Hezekiah turned his face to the wall, wept and prayed, and before Elijah had got through the courtyard, God spoke to him and said, "I've changed my mind, go back and tell him I'm going to give him another 15 years. And so he said, "Well, can you give me a sign that this is going to happen?" And so Elijah said, "Well, what about if the shadow on the sundial of Ahaz goes forward?" He said, "Well, that's nothing. What about if it goes back?" And so the shadow on the sundial of Ahaz went back so many degrees, which indicated that the Earth had stopped, done that, and then gone on again. So that's, in fact, there is, going back thousands of years, I had an article about this some time ago, I don't know where it is now, but scientists had been rolling the clock back in the same way that this guy did for that arrival at that 17,000 years. Rolling the clock back, they found that there was an anomaly. And it was a short anomaly, but it fitted that rolling back of the sundial of Ahaz. The other one, of course, rather more well known, is when Joshua and the children of Israel were fighting their way into the land of Israel. I can't remember whether it was the Moabites or the Midianites that they had a battle with, and Joshua stood up and prayed, and the sun and the moon stood still about the space of 24 hours. And so they were able to polish off their enemies without their enemies having the dark to hide in. So that is also in this kind of record, which shows there being an anomaly in when you're rolling back the clock. Excuse me a second. Let's see where we are now. Yes, the governments of this world, and of course the Vatican, know what's going on, and it's a bit ironic, really, that they've wrecked the financial systems of this world and taken most of the wealth for themselves. And if they are, I mean, "they" is a very vague term, but people in the know, they're hoping to survive what's coming and then leave the rest of us to take our chances. So, however, as Zbigniew Brzezinski, who used to be the defense advisor to a previous president, said recently, that the public are waking up all over the world, and from their point of view it's not a good thing, but from our point of view it's a very good thing. And a lot of leaks coming out. There are a couple of shots here which, if we go on to the next one, these are two separate shots which were taken at different times, and there's a guy called Marshall Masters who runs a website called YOWUSA.com. It's Your Own World Books USA. I've got some of his books on the table there, and I'd recommend that seems to me to be the soundest of the various sites that are covering Planet X. They had to decide whether videos that they'd been emailed were false flag disinformation or the real thing, because of course there is a lot of disinformation out there. There's I'm trying to remember the name of a site. Do you know? Snopes. Sorry? Snopes. No, there's some woman on there who is supposed to be a channeling medium and all this sort of thing. So that's the sort of thing I tend not to give much credence to. Anyway, when they compared the two shots that came through at some months apart, bearing in mind that this mini system is moving, it's coming our way, they found it was sufficiently close, sufficiently similar, sufficiently close to say yes, this is those photographs are genuine. So that's basically the system, that you've got Planet X in the middle, and then you've got a series of planets round it, plus a lot of debris. This comes from another source. This is a guy who got this stuff off the Microsoft Worldwide Telescope. The thing is that if you go on the particular coordinates, which come up in a moment, you find that, and normally if you go to that on Google Sky, there's a patch over it, and you can't see it. And in fact, if you zoom right in, you can see that the patch is just a square thing, and it cuts right through the edges of stars. So it's not very subtle. These are a bit indeterminate, but you see this red, characteristic dull red body, which obviously is warming up quite a bit, because it's readily visible. So that's if you come back one. That's it. Yeah. What I propose to do now is, as a little sort of light relief, as it were, I've got a short clip of a video which is, where did I put it?
Over there, the privileged planet, is it?
Yes, that's right. That's the one. Yeah.
It's the one standing up.
Oh yeah, yes, that's it. No, that's why I couldn't see it. Yes, I actually got this from an American website, but I'm sure if you want to take a look, there's a website on the back. It's a very refreshing view of the universe. So if we can just play the first little bit of this, I shouldn't play too much of it because it's sound. Yes, that's until we get permission to show the video. I shouldn't play any more than that because it's if it's going out on YouTube. But I highly recommend it because there's some wonderful stuff in here. There's a journey to the outer edges of the universe, which goes on for supposedly billions of years. This journey at the speed of light, but in actual fact, it's recognised now that the speed of light is not a constant. And I know that I had an article that appeared in the Sunday Times some time ago that in a laboratory they increased the speed of light by a factor of ×6. And I've got an article somewhere, quite sure where it is at the moment, but it is here tonight, which indicates that when the Big Bang took place, the speed of light, which as you know is 186,200 miles per second, you'd need to add another 70 noughts on the right to give you the speed at which the light emitted from the Big Bang, because of they arrive at this because of the relative uniformity throughout the entire observable universe, and they can, as you know, they can observe in incredibly long distances now. And of course, the universe is made up of billions and billions of galaxies, which are in clusters, and our galaxy is part of what's called the local group. But I mean, something like, I think the galaxy is 16,000 light years across, and we are between two spiral arms, which gives us an advantage because there's not too much dust and debris. We're in a very favoured place, not too much radiation, and also because there's not too much dust, we can see. We're in a very good position to see throughout the universe. And of course, this is another thing that when you look at the way our Earth is positioned, it's in exactly the right distance from the sun. The moon is 1/400th the distance from us as we are from the sun. And some people might say it's stretching coincidence a bit far, that the diameter of the moon is also exactly 1/400th of the diameter of the sun. So when you get an eclipse, the moon fits over the sun for a few moments perfectly, and you've just got the corona around the edge. And then at that point, in fact, in the 19th century, I think it was, that they, by observing the spectra of the light, the little bit of light which was coming out from the sun, it wasn't too bright. So they could actually measure what was coming out, and they were able to take the spectral readings of the right the way across the entire spectrum of the light that came out of the sun. So they were able to work out all the elements which are in the sun, and that was done in the 19th century. But anyway, these are just little bits of information, which, I mean, I quite enjoy this sort of thing because you never know, somewhere along the line you find it fits in with something else and it helps you to make sense of things. What I want to do now is talk with my notes, and I've actually got two sets of notes here to work from, but it depends how we're doing for time. I know that Maria and Basti have got to go at 9, so if we, yes,
until 9.
Yeah, so if I go on for about a quarter of an hour, and then we can have a question and answer session, and then if you'd like, if people are interested, I can go back to what I've still got to present. I mean, I covered the question of the origins of evil and the Big Bang, and of course it does beg the question, which I'm not going to attempt to answer, which is why the creation? I think that the Bible would perhaps say the reason for the creation was for God's satisfaction, and to give him company as well. So that's that's one possible rather simplified approach. As I think I mentioned, with the origins of evil and these fallen angels and so on. If we go further back from that, Lucifer, who became Satan, was created perfect, and he was described as the anointing cherub that covers the throne of God. He was perfect in all his ways, had all knowledge, wisdom, beauty. He had absolutely everything. And then an evil thought came into his mind, and he said, and pride came into his heart, and he said, I will be like the Most High. I will ascend on the sides of the north and have my throne equal to the Most High. And there was war in the heavenlies. And it says that he took the third of the stars of heaven, which is believed to be a euphemism for a third of all the angels with him. And there was a war. Now, in actual fact, there are references to cosmic war in Egyptian, Sumerian, and I believe South American ancient records. And there's something pretty horrendous did go on in the solar system. In fact, the Sumerian traditions talk about a planet called Tiamat, which was hit and destroyed. And in fact, what it's thought is that this planet was struck by a large body, which sort of broke a great chunk off it. And we're talking of the time before, way before the times of Adam and Eve. I mean, we could be talking about maybe millions of years ago. I don't know, but the point is that there is evidence of life on Mars, and there's certain strange things about our solar system, like the moon is actually hollow. And in fact, when the NASA exploded something on the surface, it rang like a bell for half an hour. The way that the moon has been positioned, it's very obviously there is if you like, say a real intelligence behind its position and what it's doing. Because I mean, without it, I mean, we wouldn't have any tides. And it keeps us in a stable orbit. Was it 23 degrees, I think, the incline from the vertical, which gives us our seasons as we go around the sun. But anyway, this war in the heavens, if you were to take a computer model of the Earth and drain all the water out and look at the Pacific Ocean side on, the Earth looks like an apple with a great bite taken out of it. So there could be something in that. The kind of thing that was going on, if you Google a gentleman by the name of Colonel Tom Bearden, he's done a lot of work on scalar EM, electromagnetism, and the kind of things which the Americans get up to with their was it high altitude auroral research project, HARP. And there is some suggestion that they're using HARP as a weapon, and that they used it on China, and they've used it on, that was the cause of the earthquake in Haiti. And in fact, this type of technology has been around a long time, because in the 1960s, they were doing this type of thing, which is bouncing billions of watts of electricity off the ionosphere, and then it reflects back down. So the ionosphere starts to vibrate, and then it sets up a sympathetic harmonic vibration with the Earth. And if it's strong enough, then that loosens all the bonds of the stresses in the Earth and triggers an earthquake. But apparently in 1960s they were doing this also, flying at high altitude and dropping iron filings in the ionosphere, and Chile lost half its coastline and had the worst earthquake they'd ever had up until recently. But anyway, that's details. I've talked about the fact that there was life on Mars, and if you look very carefully on the web, you'll find there's a lot of indications of evidence of life on Mars. And there are kind of sort of like surface tunnels which appear to have a series of hoops. It's as though they're transparent tunnels with a series of hoops on them, and they could even be in use now. Another thing which I observed on one site is that the temperature on Mars was not the sort of the extremes that NASA tell us about. I mean, the temperature on this particular occasion, in this particular location, was 20 degrees centigrade, which is quite comfortable. Anyway, if we come now to the time that Adam and Eve were created in the Garden of Eden, because if you'd imagine that the planet had been broken, so much upheaval that it destroyed all life on the planet. I mean, it was probably sort of complete sort of flame out, I should think. And it was, the Bible talks about, in the beginning, the earth was without form and void, and the Spirit of the Lord moved upon the face of the waters. In other words, it was a water planet, there was no land, and creation then took place over 6 of God's days, but it could have been millions of years of ours. So anyway, finally Adam and Eve were placed in the Garden of Eden. And Adam first, and then Eve came later when God found that he was a bit lonely. So I think we know all about Adam's rib. And they were in a position where they didn't know, the Bible says that they didn't know evil. So in other words, they didn't have any sort of choices in life to make in terms of what was right and what was wrong. They would just automatically do the right thing. And then, of course, Lucifer took on the appearance of a serpent and went and tempted Eve to eat the one fruit from the only rule that God had given them: don't eat that fruit. But apart from that, you're free. And of course, he'd said to them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth, which of course is very interesting because that word replenish indicates that it had previously been plenished and it needed replenishing. So that's a very good pointer from the scriptures here. So the fall, they were cast out of the Garden of Eden, and the lineage of man began. And of course, evil had got in at that point, because when you look at their firstborn son Cain murdered his brother Abel, so there was evil in the system then. But God in his love had made a plan to redeem mankind, and of course it talks about God said to them that Satan would bruise Adam's heel and Adam would bruise his head, and indicating that there would be Satan would be dealt with in the fullness of time. So anyway, the plan of redemption was based on the atonement, which is the shedding of blood for the remission of sin, and that was demonstrated to children of Israel, because God chose Abraham and decided that he was going to have a people especially for himself, which were the descendants of Abraham. And the plan was that he required them to set up the sacrificial system where they would sacrifice an animal for the sins of the people. And so this went on for years and years and years, and in fact they were still doing that sacrificial system at the time of Jesus, Of course, what the arrangement became that, in fact, I think I'm going to break there and show you a short video because I want you to understand what I'm going to say, which follows that. So we can. Hang on, I wanted. Yeah. Okay. There we are. That's good.
Quickly, okay. Dry blood is dead blood. Everybody knows that, all right? They can test the blood of the pharaohs, the mummies of the pharaohs.
I'll tell you where the blood
There's
comes from
certain
afterwards.
things They, can do. They cannot get a chromosome count by any method I'm familiar with, all right? Things keep changing. I don't profess to know everything. However, there's no way I know that you get a chromosome count out of dead blood. You get DNA and some other things, but not a chromosome count, all right? That's done by living white blood cells. Now then, first of all, in this analysis, I took the blood into a laboratory in Israel. I asked one of the people I work with in antiquities, where is a good laboratory that does reliable work? And they said, such and such, such and such. I took it. I just said, please examine this blood and tell me what you can tell me about it. All right? They said, well, look, we're going to reconstitute it. We're going to put it in normal saline and keep it at body temperature for 72 hours with gentle swirling. All right? That's their business. That's great. I said, now I want to be there when you check it out. They said, fine. So I was back. They checked it out. I said, now, they said it's human blood. We can tell that. They did whatever tests they need to do. And then I said, take some of the white blood cells and put them in a growth medium and keep them at body temperature for 48 hours. And they said, well, that'll do no good because it's dead blood. I said, would you please do that for me? And they said, okay, we'll do it. So anyway, I said, I want to be there when you take it out and examine it. So I was back there. They took it out, examined it under the microscope, and the one technician called the other one over there, and then they called the boss over there, and they were talking Hebrew a mile a minute there for a little bit, and they looked at me and they said, Mr. Wyatt, this human blood only has 24 chromosomes in it. Everybody else has 46. You see, 23 from your mother, 23 from your father, 22 autosomes from your mother, 22 autosomes from your father. You get an X from your mother, you may get an X or Y from your father, all right? This blood had 23 chromosomes from the mother's side, one Y chromosome only. You see, the child could not have developed if they hadn't had the autosomes from the mother. So all of his physical characteristics were determined by his mother's side of the family, her autosomes. His maleness was determined by this one Y that came from the source, not a human male. Then they said, this blood is alive. And then they said, whose blood is this? I said, it's the blood of your Messiah. And I assure you, those men's lives have changed. Well,
All right. This gentleman, Ron Wyatt, as I mentioned before, he also did the work on the Noah's Ark, and he had been doing a lot of work in Jerusalem, outside the city walls, in an area where there is a hill which has got caves in it, and it looks like a skull. And in fact, it's known as Golgotha, the place of the skull. he'd been excavating and digging tunnels and so on. They'd found a lot of very interesting stuff, which is all on his website. And eventually, they found their way into a particular chamber, which was full of rocks, but they moved enough of the rocks, they were able to see that there was a golden covered table, which had a series of bells and pomegranates around the edge, which they deduced was the table of showbread from the temple in Jerusalem. Also there was a sort of stone enclosure, and inside, well, it was like a stone box which went up almost to the ceiling, and there were stones on the top, and they were able to, well, the stones at the top had been parted, and he was able to just get a look inside there, and lo and behold, the Ark of the Covenant. The golden box with the two cherubims with two of their wings touching at the back, and the other two wings pointing upwards and outwards, and on the top of the box, what the Bible refers to as the mercy seat. Now, on the side of the hill, there's a ledge which they'd excavated down to, and they found in this ledge there was 3 holes which had got stones pushed into them, which when they removed them, they were sort of about the size that like a very substantial post hole, about the size you could drop the base of a cross into, and the center hole had a crack in it. And they found that he traced that crack down, all the way down. It was 20 feet above the Ark of the Covenant. So the blood of Jesus on the cross, particularly when the centurion thrust his spear in his side, flowed down the cross, flowed down through the hole, 20 feet through the rock in this fresh crack, because the earthquake occurred while Christ was on the cross. And that would have been, so that rock would have been clean. So it flowed down onto the mercy seat. And that is the blood which Ron Wyatt took a sample of and has had analysed. So I just want to let that sort of sink in a moment. Do you want to break? I know that's sort of a bit of a cliffhanger to break on, but should we break for some questions until 9 o'clock?
Sounds good.
What do you think?
Okay. Thank you very much.
Oh.
Thank you very much. Rusty Maria, have you got any questions in the short time that you've got left?
Yeah, one question which I mentioned earlier, which I find quite intriguing, is a lot of the writers, like Zechariah, that wrote about the 12 planets, suggesting there was a 3,600-year orbit.
Yes.
And if indeed that is the case, you would think that if these huge bodies knocked into the Earth, which is what he suggests, comes past.
Yes, it would come past. It's the odds of knocking into the Earth are I mean, if you look at the size and the distances involved, you've got very large objects moving around. They don't have to get very close to each other to create an interaction, because there's electrical, magnetic, and gravitational. So, some of these forces are opposed to each other. So you can get an awful effect and still be a fair distance away.
Yes, so you have some sort of devastation here.
Yes, it's a bit like, I mean, Marshall Masters on Yowza.com refers to it as a bit like where you've got a load of billiard balls, and suddenly you pot or you send a ball towards them, and they all scatter in all directions. It's in 3 dimensions, as it were. There is another factor that, in relation to our solar system, in mythology there was the birth of Venus. Now, what that suggests is that Venus was a come-lately planet to our solar system, and that drew off most of the atmosphere.
Yes, but if it was on a 3,600-year orbit,
yeah,
then that would take, if we do a timeline back,
yes,
for instance, surely that would take us back to like the early Bronze Age? Yeah.
Well, yes. I mean, the thing about the timeline is that every time that Planet X system comes comes our way, its actual orbital period is going to change. And they reckon it's getting progressively shorter. So this time it's about 3,600 years. The previous time it was probably longer. And
my main question is kind of leading up to that.
Yeah.
If that indeed is the case, which I'm sure there is a 12 planet out there,
Mhm.
but if it did happen within, and let's say add another 2,000 years on top of that to take in some kind of ecliptic orbit, a lot of the ancient sites on Earth are still in alignment to
Yes.
certain suns and even stars.
yes,
And one would think if it had been knocked into, everything would be out of alignment.
yes, yes. That's an extremely interesting thing. I mean, there's two possibilities there, I think. One is that whatever happened much longer ago than and another one is that although perhaps the last time it came round, at the time of when the children of Israel were leaving Egypt, that it wasn't a sufficiently severe effect to destabilize the planet. So there wasn't a pole shift at that time. But at some time in the past, there have been pole shifts. And what I find confusing is that, I mean, I had an excellent little book by a Frenchman, actually. Unfortunately, I left it somewhere. And he was looking at the Polynesians. And because the Polynesians have got no connection to the Pacific Rim in their historical background, he was trying to work out where they come from. And going into their myths and legends, it became apparent that they'd come from Antarctica. And this tied in with, I don't have the time periods for this, except for one, which is that a previous North Pole was over Hudson's Bay, which is something like 20 some odd degrees west of north. And the pyramids, a lot of the remains in South America and in some other parts of the world are all aligned 23 degrees west of north. Whether at some time in the past the North Pole had been where it is now and had moved around, because prior to that apparently it was over the Yukon, and then 700 BC for 50 years it was northwest of Norway. But during those times, obviously from the point of view of this guy's book, go at the other end, and Antarctica was partially habitable. So all I can say is that it could be that the North Pole that we have now has, what should we say, that's the default position, and it moves out from that and then goes back to it. I don't know. It's only a guess.
In regards to the Noah's Ark, I don't think you said it was actually stuck at 13,000 feet above sea level.
Yeah.
That's a big wave.
Well, it is, yes. But I suppose that if you've seen the film 2012. You've seen the tsunamis coming over the tops of the Himalayas. I mean, that's the sort of catastrophe. If you've got a big enough body hitting the ocean, well, then you're going to be getting waves that size. And I mean, it talks about the fountain of the great deep was opened up because obviously there was an awful lot of water under the crust, and there was a water canopy over the top of the Earth above the atmosphere, and that collapsed. So what you've got is an enormous amount of water into the system, and then somehow the land masses have got to sort themselves out, and it could be that if the Earth had given up a lot of water that was under the crust, then the crust would shrink, and it would probably push up in some places and stretch in others. But I mean, that's what happens because the Earth is squashed at the poles. It's about 60 kilometers less north to south than it is through the equator. If you've got land at the equator and at the pole, when you get a pole shift, then the land that's at the pole, that was at the pole, has got to stretch, and the land that was at the equator has got to buckle. And I believe that's how you may get mountain building.
Oh, I better get on the Russian ship and go. So there's atomic submarines they don't use anymore.
Yes.
Stay out of the stay under water.
Yeah, I mean, the question is, where do you go? I mean,
Well, the only way out of it, you talk about 2 mile high waves, unless you've got an airline, then where you're going to land, but with a submarine say it's smoother over water, no matter how rough it is up top.
Yes, yes, that's true enough. That's true enough.
If you're going to have volumes of water like that moving, it will really shake you up, I would think, if you are on somewhere.
Oh, absolutely, yes. I mean, the thing is that we just don't know. Now, I take comfort from the fact that in the Bible that there is references to this type of thing going on, but I don't think it's actually going to be that bad. I think it'll be no worse or even not as bad as the Egyptian experience.
In the section I've got on that ark, they've even got one of the cross beams they're digging out.
Yes.
As well.
Yes. Yes. Well, the interesting thing about that is that what Ron Wyatt says about that is that the timber that they've taken doesn't exhibit any rings, and that ties in with the fact that before the flood there was a constant climate condition. So it was like probably living in the subtropics 365 days a year. So probably the only thing they experienced was probably variation in day length. But yes, these. Sorry.
We're not sure that there was a Big Bang, are we?
I think that everything is up for debate, isn't it? And I mean, I like what is presented on this video that I showed a little bit of, in that it seems to make good sense to me in terms of a Big Bang.
Well, we've got a video about that.
Yes.
There wasn't a Big Bang.
Right.
I think scientifically now it's supposed to be, they say that scientists say that anyone who believes in the Big Bang is crazy.
That's what they teach in the schools, there's no Big Bang.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Oh well, I'm a bit out of date, but I wouldn't take that until I'd studied a bit more.
Okay, look, it is 9 o'clock. Shall we take that break we promised ourselves?
Yes, that's it.
So we're back here at 10 past, quarter past.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Good to see you. Okay. See you soon.
Yeah, so we'll take a break now, 10 minutes, quarter hour.
Am I transmitting? So, am I still transmitting? Yes. Okay. That's good.
Thanks, Cindy.
Ring the bell.
Yeah.
Right, covered that.
All right then. For those of us who's got it. Next week, while we're in the change, we've got a love story. That's the good news. The bad news is it's Michael Moore.
I see.
Apparently, it's a superb film, and that's what we're doing next week. Thanks for being here. I've got some postcards here, which I still haven't explained to anybody what it's all about. But I will as we're leaving. I'm not quite sure, Marilyn, what the score is on these.
No, they were just.
Well, you're going to be
they
signing
only gave me a few down at the
Yeah.
office. They sent me a few, and I just bought half a dozen. And you could stick them on your car. Somebody wants to
Yeah.
stick one on their car.
And
Right.
prosecuted.
Depends where you stick it.
You get pulled over a bit more.
I've got them in my car.
Please keep in mind what's going on down in Bournemouth. What I will do, Marilyn and Alan, at some point, maybe this next week, if you give me the dates that you've got booked, I'll stick it along with one of my emails.
Oh, okay. Yes.
I have to put a sticker on the back of your car. I support the SAS and they support me. There's the one for you. Yes. Right, if I may, I'll go into part 2. Right. Yeah, there's no more. I don't think there's any more to come on the screen. However, as I finished with the video of Ron Wyatt, who was a researcher who'd worked for many years on various sites, biblical sites, he discovered or established beyond any doubt that the fossil in the the foothills of the Ararat range is a ship, and most likely to be Noah's Ark because it's in the right place, it's at the right age. There are as you go sort of down the valleys towards away from the ship, they find drogue stones which are about sort of this high, and what they were, it would be a stone with a big hole in it which would have a rope or a chain attached to the ship. It was to stabilize the ship. They'd have a whole load of these. They're called drogue stones, and it was a very common in seafaring and navigation in the Mediterranean that you find drogue stones about that big, with a big hole in them where they've been used to stabilize it in a storm. And obviously, as the ark had been coming down, they'd been shedding them. But anyway, that's just a detail there. More to the point, more significantly, he had worked on this hill outside Jerusalem, which is believed to be the site of Golgotha, which was the site of the crucifixion. And because it all fits. There's the side of the hill, which looks even today like a skull. I've got a photograph of it somewhere. I might have brought it with me. So there's that. There's and on the side of the hill, he'd done a lot of excavation, and over a fairly protracted period of time, he'd uncovered a platform in which there were 3 holes, and each hole had a stone plug in it. Having removed on the central one, there was the hole was about the right size you'd expect to be able to drop the base of a cross into, and there was also a crack, and that crack ran down through the rock for some 20 feet. Beneath it, there was a chamber, and over a period of several years, he'd been doing excavations in and around this hill, because he only had a few months of each year, because he was actually an American anaesthetist, and he used all his savings and all the money he could spare to do this archaeological work. But they eventually found, in a particular chamber, piled up with rocks, they managed to move the rocks away and found, you could see something gleaming gold. They moved the rocks away and found this table, which I think I mentioned it earlier, a table of showbread, because it had around it an alternating pattern of pomegranates and bells going around the edge, which was, according to, that's in the Bible, referring to the table of showbread. He also found a separate chamber, which is like a rock chamber, which came up to within about that far of the ceiling, and it had stones on the top, but these stones had been pulled back, and peering in, he could see that this contained the Ark of the Covenant, which is a golden box with the 2 wings of the cherubim touching at the back, and then the other wings going. Have I covered this? I've just yeah. Sorry, I am repeating myself.
Can you Google? Is it possible to
Yes,
Google
yes.
Ron Wyatt?
Google Ron Wyatt, and you'll get it all. Sorry, I'm senior moment that I'm covering the same material twice. So, but the point being that was the, if you like, the fulfillment of the atonement. That the blood had been received on the mercy seat, which under the sacrificial system, which was a type or a predecessor of what had finally happened, that the priests would sprinkle the blood of animals on the mercy seat as an atonement for sin, in what should we say, in preparation for the coming of the Messiah, because as the Bible says that the blood of bulls and goats and so on could never really take away the sins of the people, so the whole process was repeated. It was an ongoing process. However, once Jesus gave up his blood on the cross and died for us, then that was the whole thing that was finished. The Bible says that it was required for him to make an atoning sacrifice once only, and then to sit at the right hand of God. So what also comes on from this is that, okay, it means that Satan has lost his power over us in that we now have an option. We have an option to reject him and to turn our back on him and, if you like, join God's club instead of Satan's club, which is to repent of your sins and give your heart to Jesus and live for him instead of living for self, which is, because as you probably know, the creed of Satanism is do what you will, whereas the God's creed is do my will. And God being a God of love and care and consideration, he, whatever is his will, would only do us good. So, I mean, I know that's a sort of a gross oversimplification, but that's the sort of contrasting the two ways of living, as it were. And it's interesting that Darwin produced this theory of survival of the fittest and nature red in tooth and claw and all that sort of thing, which is the complete antithesis of faith, hope, and love, which is the way of life for the Christian. Of course, what Satan was left with was only the opportunity to deceive and to tempt, but he doesn't have control over us as such, because we can turn our back on the temptations and the deception, and if we just cling to the truth. So that's what I wanted to cover on that. As you know, the Bible is a supernatural book. In both the Old and New Testaments, some of the books are encoded. There's a couple of books I've got here by a journalist called Michael Drosnin, Bible Code and Bible Code 2, and there's some very interesting information in those. I mean, in the first one, for example, it refers to in the code, and the way that the information is extracted from the code, all the Hebrew characters are run together, so there are no commas, punctuation, or gaps. So it's one solid mass of text. And then by interrogating the computer and saying, right, this is what I want to find it for me, and the computer will automatically run various algorithms, I suppose they are, to work out whether it's going to pick out once every third letter, every 13th, every 70th, or every whatever it is, to produce information. And for example, the rise of Hitler, men landing on the moon, the Kennedy assassinations, the Gulf War, all foretold by the Bible Code. So he goes on, does it predict doom for us all, or is it the key to man's survival? Now, what they have found is that in terms of asking it things about the future, it's more a case of, if you do this, that will happen. So in other words, it's a living document. So there's a way and means of using it to beneficial effect. The assassination of Yitzhak Rabin was predicted, and the author got to the premier, as he was then, of Israel, and gave him the information, and the response he got was a bit fatalistic. Well, if it happens, it happens. But in fact, a year later, he was shot, actually by an Israeli, and the week after that, they were looking in the text, and they found the name of the assassin, Amir, in the text. So, absolutely amazing. It defies the brain of man to even begin to work out how it happens. But it's this. I suppose I tend to view God as being outside of time, and he can move in any direction in time, and whereas we can only move forward in time. So that's just something I wanted to say about that. There are also in the New Testament, in some of the Gospels, you find mathematical relationships which could not be written, and I mean, it would not be possible for somebody to sit down and write the Greek to achieve the same effect. I haven't got much information on it, but if you want to Google it, Google that type of thing, Bible codes, New Testament, perhaps you might find something useful to come up. Oh yes, so just a point of detail, in the part 2, the Twin Towers was encoded 3,000 years ago, and also aeroplane. There's I've got another book here called The Invisible Hand, which plots the way that prophecy has been fulfilled in modern times, up until the 1980s anyway, which is quite fascinating, and a lot of quite worthwhile speculation on the fulfillment of future prophecies. So let me just come on to where I want to be. Right, that's that one. Yes, what I want to talk to you about now is we've covered the plan of redemption, and it's DNA, as Ron Wyatt was referring to in his brief talk. The DNA having only 24 chromosomes. It is likely that there are, that the black nobility, the Merovingians, and all those people who appoint themselves as our lords and masters have got a very strong agenda running. They are very strongly anti-Christian, but they take a lot of account of what the Bible says, and they take a lot of account of Christian history, if that's a word to use. The fact that they would have known about Jeremiah hiding the Ark of the Covenant in 585 BC, when probably about maybe 3 years before Nebuchadnezzar overran the city of Jerusalem. But coming back to the present time, it's extremely likely that some of that blood would have been acquired by people that we would wish had not acquired it. And we're then talking about creating a clone. Because I believe, would I be right, Owen, that you could create a clone from living blood?
I suppose you could, yes.
Yes. And so what you're then faced with is then the prospect of a clone being created which has got the same bodily characteristics as Jesus Christ, and the same, probably very similar appearance, and maybe some of the physical characteristics which might differ from the rest of us. But that is the very real possibility. I have read one author who has claimed that this has already taken place, and that the person concerned is walking amongst us. I don't know. I've only got that particular author's word for it, so I don't know whether that is true or not, but it wouldn't surprise me if it was. Certainly there is there's a book that's been going around. In fact, Robert lent me a copy, which I managed to read through, a bit of a heavy read. What was the name of that book you provided for me in photocopy form?
That would be the John Christian, was it?
Yes, that's right.
That's right. Oh, that was on the Alpha.
Yes, what was the title?
I think it was just called the Alpha course.
Yes.
I've got the whole book.
Yes.
I downloaded the whole book.
Yes, I've got it now, but I actually read it in paper form at the time. And in that, even if you don't accept his hypothesis that the Alpha course is off beam, shall we say, that the amount of information that's provided about the establishment in this country, I mean, the book is worth it for that alone. And the whole, what should we say, Freemasonry-driven movement, which is pagan, anti-Christian, and of course, as you probably are all aware, that the Freemasons, when they get up to the 30th degree, it's revealed to them that the god that they worship is actually Lucifer. And so this lends weight and strength to Luciferian agenda, which, when you refer to the Bible, you're looking for an antichrist who can deceive the nations, deceive those who are believers into believing that this miraculous person is the Christ, whereas in actual fact it's the Antichrist. And because it's a clone, it's, if you like, a ready-made vehicle to be possessed by Satan and his forces. So when you look in the Bible, it talks about that there would be effectively a one world government set up, and a system incorporated which would require every man and woman and child to receive a mark either in their forehead or in their right hand, the mark of the beast, and that no man may buy or sell save but that he has the mark of the beast. This sort of fits in quite well with Verichip, and are you familiar with the Verichip? It's about the size or smaller than a grain of rice, and it's got all the information that you would need if you want to have your complete profile and all your bank details in the chip, which would then...
Towards a cashless society.
Yes, that's right, which would then respond to a scanner. So and it would be under the skin. And it would probably migrate around the body. It would be quite difficult to remove. But it makes one wonder whether the activities of the banksters and the central banks and the politicians and if you like, your black nobility who are steering everything, the Illuminati, have been deliberately trying to crash cash for about the last 40 years. And this is their latest effort to do it, so that they can cancel cash and then bring about electronic-only transactions. And of course, if your face doesn't fit, then they can cancel your account, and all of a sudden you can't go anywhere, you can't buy anything, you can't feed yourself, and maybe you can't pay your mortgage, whatever, and you're stuck. So the Bible actually says that whoever takes the mark of the beast will take their place in the lake of fire. And so in other words, it is absolutely imperative that if you value your life, whether as a Christian now or as a Christian later, don't take the mark of the beast, because it'll finish you. So that's what the Bible says. I mean, I can only report what it says. So what we're looking at is this move towards one world government, which doesn't seem to be going too well at the moment, thankfully. So the upside of that is that may give us more time. But it may also mean that by the time we get the kind of upheavals that Planet X could present to us, that with sort of catastrophes going off sort of every day all over the globe, that they might use that as an excuse to bring about some kind of one world government. At the same time, it's worth recording that in the early 1970s, Werner von Braun, who came over to America under the Operation Paperclip project as an ex-Nazi and leader of the rocket program at Peenemünde in Germany, became one of the directors of NASA, in fact, practically the head of NASA, and he confided to his personal assistant, a young lady at the time, and she has been passing this on quite recently as an older woman, because this was, as I say, early 70s, that beware that the last great effort of the one-worlders to bring about one world government will be the fake alien invasion. And of course, we know that there's a lot of flying saucers that it appears that they are of terrestrial origin, and we read that the Americans in some of their deep underground facilities are doing the most horrible things with life and with what should we say, non-human life forms, which you might call aliens, but they're indigenous aliens, possibly, greys and reptiles and all that type of thing. It's such a weird and unpleasant subject that probably, if you're like me, I don't even like to go there. But I have read a bit about it. I've got a lot of books about it, which I've only dipped into. I haven't really read. But that would give them the perfect opportunity to create this fake alien invasion. And then another ploy would be I'm sure you've all heard of in the Bible, the second coming, which the return of Jesus Christ, who will eventually rule and reign in the earth for 1,000 years in the millennium. What I might say the dark side are trying to do is to counterfeit that in order to harvest as many souls as they possibly can for Lucifer. So that's there's a very real risk. You've got to know what we're looking at when we see all this stuff dished up to us in the media and so on. I mean, there's as an encouragement, if we believe the Bible and everything that's in the Bible, then the children of Israel lived on manna for 40 years in the desert. So it's not beyond the ability of our Creator, when we have not taken the mark of the beast, if we put our trust in Him completely, to clothe us, to feed us, and to house us, and to keep us alive. So that is that's the message on that particular point. There is predicted in the scriptures that there will be in Daniel a 7-year peace treaty will be signed with Israel and its enemies, and that the temple will be rebuilt, and that the temple sacrifice will be reinstated. Now those Jews that are likely to be doing the sacrifice and believing in it are still believing that their Messiah hasn't come yet, and that's why they still want to continue the sacrifice. So the sacrifice will continue for 3.5 years, and then the Antichrist will break the covenant, will declare war on Israel and bring all the forces of the world down on Israel, and there will be 3.5 years of absolute mayhem, and it'll be absolutely horrendous. At the end of that 3.5 years, if we interpret what's in the Bible correctly, there's likely to be a very great war, possibly Armageddon. I know I've been to the plains of Megiddo. It's a very large area, quite flat, and with sort of hills and mountains in the distance. And I felt very strange when I was standing there looking across the plain. It gave me a real sort of electric, weird sort of hair up on the back of your neck type of feeling. But there's a whole lot of things which are likely to happen, which gives me encouragement that this Planet X thing is not going to be a wipeout, that it's going to be, what you would say, just something which will make life a bit more difficult, a bit more dangerous. A lot of people may die as a result of it, but the core of society as we know it now is probably going to continue when you see the various, if you take the Bible as your guidebook. So that's what I would say. I mean, there's another battle which has yet to take place, Gog and Magog, where it says in Ezekiel, I think, that an evil thought will enter into the mind of the king of the north, and he will, which it actually refers to Rus. I mean, this is written before Russia existed, but Rus, Ethiopia, Put, Gomer. I think Gomer is actually is translated as Germany, but there will be a huge army which will descend from the north onto Israel, and what the Bible describes is what looks like tactical nuclear weapons, because their tongues and their eyes tongues will rot in their mouths and their eyes will rot in their sockets, and the same with the horses as well. Now, it talks about horses in modern warfare. Who uses horses? But bear in mind that in the Second World War, the Germans used huge numbers of horses. So you never know. There could still yet be a situation where, okay, with armored vehicles and everything else, that there will be horses there. But the point being that after this destruction of a very large army, I think only a small proportion survive and are able to retreat, then it takes them 7 years to dispose of the armaments and the remains, and anybody who finds a human remain or a bone has to put a mark by it and then leave it for the cleanup crew to come along and decontaminate the ground where that body is and clean up. That's in the Bible. So what we're looking at then is it talks about a rapture, which there's a lot of debate, and you can read lots of different books on pre-trib, post-trib, mid-trib, all this sort of thing. The tribulation being this 7-year period. I don't really have a view on it, but if I was pressed, I suppose I would say that it might well happen mid-trib, after the first 3.5 years. That what it says is that Jesus will appear in the sky and will draw all believers up into the sky. We'll go up to meet him and be transformed. So in other words, we'll go from the physical to the spiritual without leaving a physical trace. And in fact, there have been lots of dramatizations of that event. There's a Left Behind series. I don't know if anybody's come across it. So with the final battle of Armageddon, Jesus returns, puts his feet, according to Hosea, I think, on the Mount of Olives, and there's an earthquake, and the mountain divides and provides a way of escape for the Israelis in Jerusalem, because they're in the process of being overrun. Angels eventually gather up the wicked, and that Jesus establishes his rule and reign in the earth for 1,000 years, and he rules with a rod of iron. It's depicted as a kind of heaven on earth period, and at the end of that period, meantime, a false prophet and the Antichrist are in the lake of fire, and Satan, Lucifer, is put into what's called the bottomless pit. Towards the end of the 1,000-year period, he's released to test humanity for a little longer, and then everything is wrapped up. The Bible says that there'll then be a new heaven and a new earth, and that there will be the new Jerusalem, which will be seen coming out of heaven down onto the new earth. And it gives the dimensions, which is rather interesting, which is 10,000 furlongs, which is 1,500 miles on each side. So it's a cube. And that's the way it's described. Now, I hypothesize here that if you've got something which is 1,500 miles high, and it becomes a living space, as it were, then if you have floors, each floor a mile above the other one, so you've got 1,499 floors, and if you populate it, each floor, at just 30 people per square mile, then you're talking about those 30 people have 640 acres to themselves, and if you multiply that out, then the final result is 101,182,500,000. So what it suggests is that this lie that we're overpopulated on this world it comes from the pit. It comes from the opposition, as it were, the dark side, and the suggestion is that under the millennium rule of Jesus Christ in the earth, that the population could go up to those sort of levels. So, I mean, it's quite likely that land masses may be rearranged, and we may have Antarctica coming back into use as temperate land. The way that the crust is formed, it's very thin. It's only between 5 and 30 kilometers thick on average, although there are some areas in Africa where the thickness of the crust goes down over 300 kilometers. The one particular interesting point I came across in a book that you may recall, there was a very, very severe earthquake in 1965 in Alaska, and everything was skewed around, and across the landscape where you've got houses and everything else that you've got, it just looked like a ploughed field. And a piece of land was thrown up in the course of an afternoon, 200 miles long in one. So that's the sort of thing that we could see a reshaping of the crust. It may be that some areas which are not so pleasant at the moment might get subducted. Have you seen 2012, the film? Where you get the plate boundaries and a sort of a city sort of being subducted under another part of the plate. So anyway, there's that's basically my thesis on this. So it looks as though perhaps mankind will inherit the heavens. So anyway, thank you very much. Right, so any questions?
That should be fascinating. Any questions from anybody? No, I could.
Just one thing I never found in the Bible yet. You brought it in tonight. You know, the mark of the cross.
The mark of the beast, you mean?
Yeah, the mark of the beast.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, and on your hand and forehead.
Yeah.
And apparently in Russia, it was said one time that it's possible for that to happen if they go shopping, etc. Now that was just a possibility. Somebody mentioned it. But what does one try to have to do to avoid that? I haven't quite worked on it yet.
Well, at the moment, you can actually go and have a very chip inserted, and it's completely voluntary. And a few sort of high-profile people have had it done and made a big song and dance about it. And some youngsters have had it done so that they can go down to the beach in just their swimwear and nothing else and a towel, and then they can go to the bar and they can buy their drinks all that way. But it's rather sad. So the way to avoid it is basically you've got to drop out of the system.
What?
You've got to drop out of the system. I mean, did you?
Done that.
Yeah. Well, what I'm thinking, yes, you say no, but also the sort of thing that you remember the Anastasia presentation, Malcolm, that you did some weeks ago, where these people in Russia have set themselves up with their dachas. And they've put behind them the city life and all the sort of the rat race and all that sort of thing, and they're just living in tune with nature. I mean, it must be possible to adopt a lifestyle like that, because there are still sort of areas of the world which are not completely tamed. I mean, vast areas of Siberia and places like that. I have a consultant friend who had some work that took him to, I think it's Lake Baikal in Siberia, and he said it was the most wonderful, heavenly place, completely unspoiled. But anyway, yes, I mean, it is an issue. I mean, these things are not going to happen overnight. I mean, you're going to have time to make your plans and decide that whether you can continue to exist in this country or whether you feel you have to go abroad. You may have time, but it'd be worth doing your own research. Don't take what I say at face value. Do your own research, come to your own conclusions, and then act on them. So does that help?
I was a bit confused on when you said about the cross and the hole in the ground and the 20 feet down and the blood goes onto the mount, is it?
Onto the mercy seat of the...
mercy seat, yes. I was a bit confused with that because I wasn't sure whether you were implying that at the time of Jesus' being put on the cross, this chamber was there underneath.
Yes, it was.
It was.
Yes.
Because I was wondering whether they put it there afterwards or whether it was
No,
there before.
it was-
So that implies that Jesus' being put on the cross was a well orchestrated event. That
It was
knew that
well orchestrated
blood
by
would have to fall down there.
what should we say, the supernatural power of God, in that the Jeremiah put the ark and the other temple furniture in those chambers in 585 BC. So at least that's according to Ussher, the dating. So Ussher was an Irish bishop in the 17th century who worked out what he believed to be the time frames going back to Adam and Eve and the birth of Adam and Eve in the garden in 404 BC. I think that's probably subject to revision, but when you get as near to the time of Christ as Jeremiah, it's probably about right. So, yeah.
Where did this chap Wyatt get the sample of blood then to test?
Well, if you go to the website, you'll see that it would have been possible to get something in where there were stones on. There was a stone lid on the top of this chamber which the ark was in. It was cracked. The stones had moved apart, and so it would be possible to get something in, a flexible in, and scratch around and come out with a sample, because you don't need much.
When was this?
It was in I think it was either the late 80s or the early 90s. This video was shot in 2000, and then not very long after that, Ron Wyatt died. So, his sons and his wife are continuing the work of Wyatt Ministries. And there's a lot there if you Google it. And, I mean, I actually got this information. I wrote off for it and got sort of booklets on it some years ago. I can't find them at the moment, otherwise I would have brought them.
I heard that some Israelis dug up some hills in Ireland not that long ago,
Yes.
looking for the Ark of Convent.
Oh right. Oh, they were looking there.
Found.
Well, I tell you what, that makes a kind of sense, because Jeremiah travelled to Ireland, and he took with him the daughter or daughters of King Zedekiah, who was the king of Israel who was taken away to Babylon. The Jeremiah at that stage was probably a man of about 40, because the tradition in Ireland is that he continued in Ireland teaching and giving out laws, and the daughter or daughters of Zedekiah were married off into the sort of princely line of the chieftains of Ireland. And
Bridget being one of them.
oh right, yes. In fact, there's a website called St. Bridget. I don't know if you've seen it, which has got a lot of. If you Google stbridget.com, you'll get a lot of stuff. It's actually Catholic, but there's a lot of good, serious information there. So I wouldn't, although I wouldn't embrace it entirely, I wouldn't throw it out. Yes, the interesting thing about Ireland is that the kings of Ireland married with the kings of Scotland and to and fro, and eventually, of course, we got a Scottish king, King James IV of Scotland, who became the first of England in 1603, and this bloodline finds its way down to our present royal family. I had a friend some years ago. He died a couple of years ago. Bob Trench, and he was actually South African. He wrote a very interesting little book called The D Factor, which is on the table there. And while he was writing this book, he happened to be on a tour over here, and they were going around Windsor Castle. And he was stopping to admire, as an engineer, a very fine, very thick oak door, magnificent wrought iron work on it. And because the door was ajar, he thought he'd look behind it. So when he looked behind, he saw a genealogical chart on the back of this door, and it traced from King David through, I suppose, to Mary and Joseph, and all the way down to Queen Victoria. A complete genealogical line. And that is something which the Illuminati and all their like place great store by. I mean, you've heard of the Merovingian kings, I expect. They were French kings, which, if they had any real lineage, it could well have come from the relatives, like the brother or sister of Jesus. So close, but not. You see what they, through Dan Brown's book, the Da Vinci Code, they tried to propagate the idea that Jesus actually had a relationship with Mary Magdalene, and that they had a child called Sarah, and that the supernatural blood of Sarah was what was in the Merovingian king's veins, and that this is what made them special, and all that sort of thing. Well, yes, I mean, I can accept that our present royal family can trace their lineage back to King David, but not quite the way they would like it to be. But this then comes back to the point about this blood, which could have been used to create a clone, and so it's fairly certain that the other donor, if like the donor egg, would come from this genealogy, this bloodline. So anyway, sorry, I've sort of gone on a bit. I've almost forgotten the question.
Lincoln, moving to the present.
Yes.
We've got the activities of the State of Israel.
Yes.
Which, I think most people would regard with some degree of circumspection, shall we say.
Yes.
How do you think that relates to your 7-year tribulation?
Well,